everybody after everyone's spoken. So we'll go on to our next speaker, who I'm very excited to introduce. Our next speaker is Alina Tomeh. Alina Tomeh is an organizer with Sunrise Boston. She is a second-generation Syrian American raised in Boston's anti-war and Middle East liberation movements. She works in philanthropy, relaying feedback to nonprofit funders on behalf of their grantees, has served as a human rights observer in occupied Palestine, is a shareholder advocate for environmental issues, worked on the Genuine Progress Indicator and with AmeriCorps Vista. She has a BA in economics from Smith College, and we're very excited to hear from her. Take it away, Alina.
Hi, thank you, Nick, and thank you everybody for having me. I am so excited to be with all of you today and to be on the panel with people whose work I've respected for a very long time. So I organize with Sunrise Boston, and for anyone who isn't familiar with Sunrise, we are an organization of young people under 35 working to end climate change and the systemic injustices that mean that people of color, Indigenous people, and lower class people suffer disproportionate harm as a result of it. And a fundamental premise underneath all of our work is that we already have all of the technological solutions we need to make these changes. All we need is the political will to deploy them on the scale, scope, and urgency that science demands. And that means that we need a mass movement focused on changing the political common sense in this country to make sure that what we thought of as politically radical becomes politically inevitable. And so how do we do this? There has already been a lot of talk today about the Green New Deal and the Thrive Agenda. So I won't go into it too in depth other than to say how helpful and important it is to have a shared vision and framework for fighting our most pressing issues, COVID, racial equity, climate change, and economic inequity in a way that centers frontline and Indigenous communities, is based off of consensus from a range of affected organizations, and that shows how these issues and solutions are necessarily interconnected. And there's also been a lot of important discussion around our political power in this particular moment. Our movements have pushed candidates up and down the ballot to meet our demands. We've shown that we campaign like heck for those who adopt them, and that these are winning platforms. And we know that we need to keep these candidates accountable to the promise they made while campaigning, and that there are already efforts underway to do so. And locally, we need to fight for the Green New Deal and Thrive. The Massachusetts Green New Deal Roundtable, made up of 10 incredible local groups, are currently drafting proposals to push this work forward. And so with this shared goal and framework of political power in mind, I want to focus on opportunities to expand our people power and our aligned network of movements in this critical moment, with specifically the perspective of someone from Sunrise Boston. So first, we will not win this fight without people power. In a society where the balances of power are so tilted and skewed, the only chance that we have at counteracting this is building a mass movement of people. And Erica Chenoweth's research of historical global movements showed us that nonviolent movements that engage 3.5% of the population have not failed to bring about change, no matter how bold the scope of demands. And in the US, that corresponds to about 11 million people who we need to be willing to organize or take to the streets when needed. So in some way, this is good news. It means that we don't need to win by fighting against the people who disagree with us. We can win just by mobilizing a tiny fraction of the people who already agree with us, but are not yet taking action, AKA the passive supporters. Another piece of good news is that our movements are rapidly growing. Sunrise started 3 years ago and now has over 600 hubs across the country with over 300,000 members. And in Boston alone, we have over 400 members. And of course, organizations like DSA, Dream Defenders, Movement for Black Lives have also had really massive influxes of new members as well. But there's still more to do. I led and was part of Sunrise outreach team and did a lot of thinking
times through the ringer.
I had to check out twice.
And we did a lot of thinking about how to bring in those passive supporters, and we test ran some of those ideas. And what got hammered home again and again is that people who agree with us and want to take action are stopped for any range of reasons. They don't have hope that change is possible. They don't think they're smart enough to be involved, or the time they have to give is enough to do anything, or they just don't know how to tap in and get lost trying to start. But they want to help, and overall, they want to support a range of progressive issues, not necessarily just one. And so I think there's a real opportunity for us as a progressive front, especially in Massachusetts, to think creatively about supporting those kinds of people and building on-ramps for them, not just to one organization, but to our broader progressive movement. We know that we need a big coordinated base to win. So for example, what if there were lots of groups of people who met every so often? They could read a few updates of what's happening on the ground, do work to support specific campaigns based on asks provided by local orgs, and a big priority could be placed on building relationships, confidence, and understanding, because we know that that's what people need in order to keep coming back. And we don't all need as movements to build these groups ourselves. We can just provide a platform and coordinate the most relevant and important efforts for people to plug into. And so, for example, if there are a lot of them ongoing and we know that they're happening, then if we urgently need calls to be made in support of a bill on Tuesday, then they can call the Tuesday group and know there's a coordinated group of people on deck. Secondly, we will not win without a network of organizations working together. Because that's the topic of today, I will take that as evident of why that's important and just skip to some observations. So there are some best practices that are always mentioned when talking about organizations collaborating together, and rightfully so, because they're critical. This is things like building deep relationships, getting aligned on roles and goals, stepping up and stepping back appropriately, and so on. And yet, in our movements, there can sometimes still be a disconnect between talk and action, even from people who deeply understand and believe those best practices. And so, while by and large, I think there's so much to celebrate with how we're coordinating together, I think it's critical for the strength of our movements that we ask why this disconnect keeps happening. And there are a lot of important reasons why, but most of the time, in my experience, or from what I've seen, it's either because of or worsened by issues of capacity. So people are stressed out, tired, and they don't think something through in the way that they would if they were more clear-headed. Or people have so much other work going on, and then get overconfident that the relational parts of the work will inevitably happen or are already there. And without taking more time up front to build trust and get fully aligned, bumps in the road are more likely in the long run. But still, I don't think the answer is just that we know this work is important and we need to plan our time to treat it as such. That is part of it, but not all of it, because again, I think people already know that and it is still happening. In my analysis, I think it's fundamentally has to do with challenges of managing a very large volunteer grassroots organization made up of primarily people doing this work for the first or are pretty new at it. So for example, in order to do partnership work, you need to have deep knowledge about Sunrise, the issues, and the partner that you're working with. You also need to be trusted enough to handle all parts of that relationship and follow through. And to get that knowledge and credibility, you're likely also holding other roles in the hub or are already a leader in some way. So how do we avoid stacking responsibilities on the same people and risking burnout and errors? How do we spread that trust and knowledge and effectively train people? What happens when you heavily invest in training new people and they end up not being able to fill that role, which has happened many times? We are a volunteer organization after all, and things come up in life. How do we balance the fact that doing this work, getting trained up takes time, means being able to meet at specific times, and in the case of partnerships, having the confidence to at times work with adults who do this professionally when we're young people doing this in our free time. And all of those things stack up to kind of filter to people of privilege. Answering these questions start building to bigger questions in the hub of how we organize ourselves and communicate. Should there be one big Boston hub or lots of smaller hubs, a few big teams or lots of smaller cross teams? These types of questions have so many layers and are so much more complicated than they seem, especially in a hub that is trying to maximize the talents of 400 plus people. These questions are also critical in helping Sunrise Boston keep expanding, take on more of the incredible work that needs to be done, retaining people, and fully living out our values of equity. I want to be clear that people are still doing an incredible job in these roles. It's just about addressing where problems arise. And there have been lots of important changes made to our hub structure and cool initiatives in the pipeline. But still, a lot of time and energy has been spent trying to navigate these types of management questions when there's no way that we are the first to be grappling with them. And so I want to suggest that we have an opportunity to make this type of management knowledge in our context more accessible, applied, and ultimately helpful. So I know that Sunrise National is in touch with experts and that gets baked into our structure. I know that momentum organizations like COSETJA, if not now in Sunrise, do coordination around movement theory and learning. But still, for the most part, the coordination that's happening is high level, removed from most people's work on the ground, or ad hoc. And on the ground, it feels like your options for learning more about this are going to a selective week-long training, some articles that are too high level to really be helpful, or a few 100-page books that you can sift through and then try to apply to your own work. In every other field, there are resources, organizations, publications, and so on that disseminate this type of nuanced information. And if our movements are supposed to build people power with everyday normal people, that is just not accessible. So I'm wondering if our movements and organizations that want to support them or people, if there can be more sharing of best practices learned through experience or through research, more specific case studies shared, consultants or types of experts who come in with expertise that provide guidance applied to the nuances of our situations. We don't need high-level general lessons, but we could all benefit from more evidence-based, pragmatic lessons that support our field, help us hone our craft, and get better at doing the critical work of this moment.
Alina, you have 1 minute left.
Okay, well, I was just wrapping up, so that's perfect. I just wanted to say thank you, everybody. I'm excited to hear your questions as we build towards a movement for a sustainable, equitable, and just world. And I'm grateful to be in this fight with you. Thank you.